Okay, welcome back and
All
welcome,
right.
Brandy.
Hi.
Yes. Welcome, Brandy.
Thanks for
Our
joining us.
first guest.
Our
So
very
exciting.
first guest. We're doing new things. I'm
I'm
super
thrilled.
excited. I'm super excited to have you on.
Hi, I'm Julie.
And I'm Caleb. Welcome to Nursing You, the podcast where we redefine nursing in today's healthcare landscape. Join Julie and I as we step outside the box on an unconventional healing journey.
Together, we're diving deep into the heart of nursing, exploring the intricate relationships between caregivers and patients with sincerity and depth.
Our mission is to create an open and collaborative experience where learning is expansive and fun.
From the psychological impacts of nursing to the larger implications on the healthcare system, we're sparking conversations that lead to healing and innovation.
We have serious experience and we won't pull our punches, but we'll also weave in some humor along the way because we all know laughter is often the best medicine.
It is. And we won't shy away from any topic, taboo or not. From violence and drugs to family and love, we're tackling it all.
Our nursing knowledge is our base, but we will be bringing insights from philosophy, religion, science, and art to deepen our understanding of the human experience.
So whether you're a nurse, a healthcare professional, or just someone curious about the world of caregiving, this podcast is for you.
One last thing, a quick disclaimer before we dive in. While we're both registered nurses, nothing we discuss here should be taken as medical advice. Always consult with your doctor or a qualified healthcare provider for any medical concerns you may have. The views expressed here are our own and don't necessarily reflect those of our employers or licensing bodies.
So let's get started on this journey together. Welcome to Nursing You, where every conversation leads to a healthier world.
Brandy and I worked together for about 3 years through COVID, and she's one of the smartest people I know, and I think she is going to be a huge contribution to what we're doing and to the conversation today. So
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So do you want to give us a rundown of kind of how you became a nurse and the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, sure. So I went a very long and convoluted route to becoming a nurse. I'm going to date myself a little bit, but I knew from the time I was very little that I wanted to be a pediatrician. That's what I was going to do with my life. I can't remember wanting to do anything else. And in middle school, I started candy striping. So there's the date on how old I am. Candy striping is not even a thing that exists anymore. And I followed a pediatrician, and it was about 20 minutes into this shadow experience that I just looked at him and I said, "At what point do you take care of the kids?" And he said, "I don't. This is my job. I come in, I see them, I write some stuff down, I talk to the nurses, and I leave." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I want to see what they do." And so he then paired me up with the nursing staff. And that's when I got to see, okay, these are the people that put hands on and take care of. And this is what I'm interested in. And so I volunteered on the pediatric unit for a very long time. And this was when we did paper charts. And somebody called up from the emergency room looking for some help building paper charts. And I said, "Well, I can go. I can, staple paper charts here or there. It doesn't matter." And I went down there, and this is when EMS systems were intertwined with hospitals, and the tones went off, and I'm looking around going like, "Wait a minute, what is that?" And a very, very well-seasoned paramedic said, "Hey kid, how bored are you right now?" And I'm like, "I'm pretty bored." And he's like, "Get in, let's go." And I went on my very first ambulance ride, and that was it. So I did EMS for the first 14 years of my career, and then decided once I had children that I needed not 24-hour shifts, that I needed stability and a bigger paycheck. So I said, "Okay, I'm going to go to nursing school." And I went to nursing school. Stayed in emergency medicine my entire career in some form of another. When I was going to school, I was a tech, I was an EMT, a medic, did all that stuff. And I've been in it for 22 years at this point. I met Caleb in the PACU. The PACU is my safe space when I get really frustrated and just kind of burnt out of the ER. I go to the PACU, and it's a different change of pace, a different type of patient. And you can kind of fill the cup up a little bit more and then get ready to go back to the emergency room. And I have worked, my husband spent 21 years in the Marine Corps. So I have traveled all over the country and done all kinds of levels, from level 1 trauma centers and urban cores to critical access hospitals that are so far out, the doc has to get in his boat and drive across the lake. He doesn't even stay at the hospital all night long. And just about everything in between. And I've never ventured outside of emergency medicine. It's what I loved, what I always thought I would do. I used to joke around and say, they will remove me and my walker from the ER. I'll never leave. And then COVID hit, and that completely changed my perspective and the way I think about medicine and the way it's ran, and the way that I can add value to the system changed. And so I became a professor, and I am 2.5 years deep into a PhD at this point, trying to figure out how can we better prepare nurses to do the job, the actual job that we expect them to do upon graduation, not this fantasy that is created for them. Yep. And so that is what I am trying to figure out. And that is my entire career in a nutshell.
Tell us about the research that you're doing.
So I do simulation sequencing and integration, and we're using a couple different theories. We all know Benner, and she has established that in order for you to be a good nurse, you have to have experience. You have to see it, touch it, smell it, do it. You have to learn it essentially the hard way. There is no, I can't tell you and it makes sense. You have to do it. And then there's adult learning theory that if we put things in particular orders, just like the way your computer works, your brain takes inputs and it decides where to store them. And then it decides how easily or readily you can pull the information back out. And so I'm looking at if we sequence simulation to mirror their didactic content. So we teach them the book stuff, and then they put them in an environment where they can get that experience, where they can see it, do it, touch it, smell it. Then I can put them into the clinical environment. And so by the time they hit the workforce, they have taken care of a diabetic patient. They have taken care of a stroke patient. They have done all those things that we used to rely on clinical sites for. And because healthcare is now a business and there is liability in business, the first thing that happens when my students are in clinical, if something goes wrong or something is going south, they remove the students. They don't let students do anything anymore.
Wow.
They're wallflowers. And they expect this knowledge to just osmose into their head from the wall. And anyone who is a nurse understands that it does not work that way. So that clinical site is deeply underwhelming, and they're not getting the experience they need. And there are some data out there, and if you want, I can send some references so you can post, because people are going to want to know where I got these numbers from. We can put them in show notes or something. But 77% of new grads cannot complete a basic assessment. What? 77%. Now, I'm not a math genius, but that tells me that only 23% can, and that should terrify you.
That's wild.
56% of new grads fail to rescue their patients because they do not understand that their status is decreasing rapidly. They fail to rescue their patients.
Wow.
If that's not terrifying, I don't know what is. Medical error is now the third leading cause of death. And 56% of all medical errors are completed by nurses with less than 1 year of experience.
Wow.
That's an education problem.
Yeah.
That's an onboarding problem. That's an orientation problem. That is an education problem. And we are putting new grads in situations that they are not equipped to handle. Wow. And our patients don't know any of this stuff, because the only thing we put in front of them that matters is HCAP scoring. Is your water glass full? Is your pillow fluffed? We don't measure patient outcomes. So that's what I'm trying to fix.
Those scores, just the satisfaction surveys.
So that's what my research is in, is trying to find a way that we can produce a not a smarter
that's what you're talking about.
More competent nurse. How can I get you better equipped day one to do the job? Because hospitals are not going to give you the year orientation that an ICU nurse used to get. They're not going to give that to you. You're going to get your 12 weeks. And at the end of your 12 weeks, you're off and running.
Wow.
Just eye-opening.
Yeah,
It is.
I mean,
And there's currently not one scrap of quantitative evidence about simulations use. No one has directly tied it to either student learning outcomes or exam scores or board results or patient outcomes. None of that research has even been done.
wow.
Mm-hmm.
which makes you the world leader in this space. Like,
I don't know about the world leader, but
Like-
it's a small niche that I am trying to push, something that we have to consider. Like, why
Yeah.
are we spending millions of dollars in the simulation world if we don't even have any proof that it works?
Right.
We've been
Right.
doing this for so long. Simulation started, originally in the early 1900s, but for nurses and medicine, traditionally in the 70s. But we've spent all this time developing it, evaluating it, designing it, but nobody ever went and does it work?
I mean, that's one of the things. Like, you know, when we first started, we ran, what were they called? When we would simulate a code,
Like the mock.
The mock codes.
the mock code, but then we had a
Yeah, the mock code. Oh.
where we would go through every step, and you had instant feedback. You had the medicines right there in your hand. Like, seeing it, touching it, the what the label looks like.
Yes.
All of that prepared you to step into that critical situation, and it's almost like the questions were eliminated because you had that hands-on experience. And
Correct.
like, I don't care what anyone says, simulating a code on the computer is ineffective.
No,
It doesn't work the way that a master code worked.
it
A
is
mega code. It was a mega code, remember?
That's the
Mega
term.
Mega code.
There it was.
In ACLS, it was the mega code, and everybody was
Yeah.
petrified about it. And
Yeah.
and as you should be,
Right,
because
right.
you need to know your shit. And that
Yes.
really prepared. And now you got these, nurses who don't have very much experience with the code doing the ACLS, because everybody needs to be ACLS now, for their very first time
Mhm.
through the eSIM, and
Mhm.
they're just trying to get to the end. That's it. They're trying to manipulate and use the technology just to get to the end, so they can just be done, because they don't know anything about it. They've never been in one, so how could you even know?
We have created, so along with the EHR platform that has taken the thought process out of nursing. So a million years ago when I started this, if I didn't know all the parts and pieces of a cardiovascular assessment, I could not write my notes. All the parts and pieces wouldn't be there. I had to know what was involved in that. And so then we got
Right.
into EHRs, which were designed for billing purposes, not nursing purposes. And now that assessment becomes a box that I can check. So if I don't know that capillary refill is part of the cardiovascular assessment, when I get to that box, it's going to prompt me. And so now ACLS, BLS, that RQI system, all of those things that put all of this on the computer, we are generating medical staff who use checklists. It is an order of operations for them. It is as Caleb will recognize, an SOP. I do step 1, then I do step 2, then I do step 3, then I do step 4. And we're memorizing those lists. The problem with nursing is I could have 10 patients all coding at the same time, all with the same disease process. I am going to have 10 different codes.
Absolutely.
No two patients are going to behave the same. So I cannot put them into a box and follow a checklist. I have to be able to use my brain and say, okay, we need to go this route now versus following the checklist. And we have gotten away from standing orders, checklists, this basic knowledge being something that we do when we don't know what else to do. to being the only thing that we learn. And so you cannot put them in application specific scenarios because they never learn to apply the knowledge. They memorize the steps and they go through the steps. And what happens if the patient doesn't follow the steps? That's where we're at. And so now these nurses come out, and I call them order set nurses. I'm going to put an order in and they're going to follow all of those orders. And if one of those orders says give grandma 400 milligrams of morphine, they're not going to have the application piece to think about, wait a minute, that might be too much for grandma to handle. They just follow the orders. And that's what that computer-based learning does, because it is very well structured to mimic how your brain learns things. And you got to remember, K through 12, we teach them to memorize, take the test, and dump the information. Memorize, take the test, and dump the information. You can't do that with nursing content. Stuff you learn on day one is just as important as stuff you learn in year 30.
Yeah.
And we structured their learning on a format that does not apply in our world. And then we're shocked when they can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the big things that's popping up for me is just that, Julie and I have talked about this in the past, how the salty veteran nurses that just leathery personalities that
shoot us up, spit us out.
So hard on us.
Yes.
The value of that is like irreplaceable, and because that's the only way that those nurses are going to learn is, and like the saying, we've all heard it, nurses eat their young.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, it's always such a negative thing. Like in this context of what you're saying, it makes eating our young a valuable contribution to society, because we're essentially weeding out those who can't really, who are going to be dangerous. I mean, shit, I was dangerous.
We're going to be dangerous. That's the key. And we're no longer weeding them out.
Well, we were all dangerous day one.
Well, yes, but the difference is, my nursing mom, as you call it. If she pops up from heaven right now, you would immediately see a visceral reaction. I would be like, I didn't do it. I may have, I don't know. Like, and that is it's not necessarily that she ate me as a youngling, but she required and demanded that I learned what I needed to learn to do the job effectively. She accepted nothing less. And you take out those, you essentially separate not those that are smart versus not smart, because that's not what we're measuring here. You are taking out those, what I tell my students, you have to be smart enough to know what you don't know. If I ask you something and you look at me and you say, you got it, I have to know that you really have it. Yeah. And your fear of being wrong was what drove you to learn what you had to learn. You were unwilling to be mediocre at it, because I wasn't going to let you do that. It wasn't going to happen. And we've taken that out. And now, instead of them only being dangerous because they're new, they're dangerous significantly longer. Yeah. It's taking them a lot longer to get their feet wet, to kind of wrap their head around what's going on. When you have a nurse who, my student finds a central line that is completely uncapped, no pigtail on it at all. And she just brings my student a pigtail and says, well, you can put this on and then you can use it. And I'm like, no, you can't. That's not how it works. Right. I'm sitting here and thankfully my student was either A, terrified enough of me, or B, unwilling to make the mistake, because I demand, if you do not know, you ask. She called me in there and she's like, hey, can I use this? And I'm like, absolutely not. Yeah. I don't know how long that's been open. There could be a blood clot in that line this big, and we're just going to flush it into the body? Right. But you're looking at a veteran nurse who's been on that floor for 7-8 years. And that process didn't
Yeah.
occur. The line needs a pigtail, here's a pigtail.
Right.
Yep.
That's what I mean, I think that's what's missing is the the new nurses coming out, they don't have the leathery, mothers to raise them.
Yes.
That's I was raised by a leathery mother. I was a leathery mother. But
Yes.
now as we're leaving the bedside and we become, aged in our 50s and we're not doing that anymore, that it gets watered down with like
Mhm.
every graduating class and mediocre has just become acceptable. And
It's acceptable, and it's, I think, probably built into the hospital's
yes,
risk cost analysis.
yes.
And that's your true problem, is the hospitals view it as, well, if my patient doesn't know they're getting substandard care, then there's no risk for me putting these people in positions where the only thing they could possibly get done would be substandard care.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's not enough time and there's not enough people, and they don't leave people in orientation long enough.
Yep.
And, I mean, you could list 100 things, but a big primary focus has shifted from excellent clinical care
Mhm.
to reimbursement and
Yep.
surveys and patient satisfaction. And the patients are no longer patients, they're customers.
Mm.
So
Clients.
they're clients, right? They're
You want to
they're
make my word
paying
more. That's
clients,
it.
which is
Yep.
funny because they don't even pay. Their insurance companies pay.
Correct. I've never had a client in my life.
No.
Right.
Doing this 22 years, and I have never once taken care of a client. Not one
Right.
time.
And I think, so that's where me and Caleb sometimes will just sit and look at each other like, well, so, what? What do you do? How do you do? We can't fix this. And
Correct.
so then you start to feel overwhelmed. But then we're like, okay, come back down to reality. We can make a difference by just talking about it, bringing people on, the small things that are an awareness, and things that you're doing, I
The
guess.
knowledge becomes the power. Because if I
Yeah.
can open this world, my students up to this world, when they go in their interviews, they know to ask about staff turnover, attrition rates. They know to ask about what's your department function like? How many people have more than 5 years experience or less than 5 years experience? I teach them to ask these questions of these managers when they go in to do these interviews. And like Caleb has said previously, you interview them. There is not a hospital in this country that doesn't need a nurse. There's not one in this country. There's not a place in this country that is like, oh no, we don't need nurses.
Yeah.
So you are interviewing them. Find the fit that is going to prevent you from losing your license down the road. That's going to set you up for success and not failure.
Mhm.
And I think that's why I went to education, because I can't do that in the healthcare world. I can only educate the workforce, and so that they demand better, so that they demand those moms that exist on the unit that can help them. And is it difficult? Yes. Is it fun? No.
Yeah.
But when you are on your own and you are the one that is like able to function and think and move through situations critically, it makes sense. I'm like, oh, now I know why I was like that. Now I know she did these things. Now it makes sense to me. Just like it is when you're a teenager and your parents tell you no.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense till you're older. It's the same in nursing.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
I did a little stint as a manager and did some hiring. It was in the spring of 2020. So these nurses were graduating, doing the rest of their clinicals online for that year.
Mhm.
And the system isn't set up to really allow for the nurse to interview the hospital. It's like they don't know that they're supposed to do. They would come in just grateful that they even got an interview.
Yes.
No questions.
Mhm.
And I was the one that was like giving them the real deal. Like I didn't want to give them a fake scenario of the unit that I was hiring them on. I was like This is a 20 bed, very, very fast paced unit. There are a lot of discharges and admits. And actually, though, but she wasn't a new nurse. There was a couple nurses that were like, "Actually, no, thank you." But,
Right.
thank God. I mean, thank God I told them that,
Yeah.
because if I wouldn't have, 100% fail. They would have
Of
just
course.
failed me, and all of that would have gone to naught, and all the orientation would have been naught. But,
Mhm.
I don't think it's not set up that way. They just want the bodies, get them in there, get them
Of
oriented
course.
so that we can have the count, the numbers. We have enough nurses on, no one can bitch, But you talk about numbers of nurses on the unit who can take patients, but then you talk about who actually can take care of the patients, because
Right.
we have probably all worked shifts with, like, okay, they're here, but, like, we need to keep an eye on all of those
Mhm.
patients. Like,
Mhm.
they sent her
Mhm.
to us from the float pool, but
Mhm.
and, what are you gonna do? Be like, "Actually, we don't want her," or "We don't want him," you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
no, you're just like, "Okay, I guess I have 8 patients now, so I'll have to watch." Or you tell other people to watch. It
And we don't have, not only do we not have the nurse moms to exist to be that like hovering person that makes
Yeah,
sure that you're not going to do anything completely crazy, we don't give the people that are there, that may even have even a little bit more experience or a little bit more knowledge, any breathing room to mentor
yeah,
or to help
right.
those people that coming just a little bit overwhelmed. Because whether we like, if you took me 22 years in emergency medicine and you put me in an ICU, I would be like, okay, everybody here is alive. I don't know
Right,
what you want from
right.
me. They're all sorted. They
Yeah,
all like all the holes
yeah,
and things have been identified.
yeah,
I don't know how to fix any of it. I am a
yeah,
sorter and a band-aid sizer. Like that is it.
yeah,
I don't know how
yeah,
to fix it.
yeah. Well, I always would call that a tasker. You can do the tasks. Like when
Yeah.
they would send a med surg nurse down to ICU. I can tell you the tasks. You can pass the meds, you can do that, but you have no experience in clinically judgment of what the situation is,
Or how
and
to fix it.
or how to fix it. Right.
Mhm.
And so that to me falls on administration, and many ICU nurses would say, you can't send us just anybody.
Right.
You can't
Mm.
count that person as a full staff. So
Yes.
now, we might have the numbers of what these patients call for, but it is very, very dangerous still.
Mhm.
And none of that ever matters. None of that matters to anyone, because administration, and they all leave at night. So
Mhm.
they're sleeping. They don't care,
Yes.
and they can say they care, but you don't, because if you did, you wouldn't allow it to be that way.
Correct.
You would demand. It's just like sending a nurse into surgery. What?
Yes.
But
Mhm.
that would never happen. Or how about labor and delivery? You would never send a med surg nurse over to deliver a baby. Never. That
Mhm.
never happens. You might send someone over who can answer call lights and task and do CNA
Yep.
work, but it's allowed on all units. So if you go to a specialized unit and you're in the float pool, or you're floating from a floor that's low census, you're screwed.
You are, and you're totally set up for failure. And then there's not enough people to where that person who's coming to help cannot take a team who can just relieve some of those tasks that need to be done. It would be the craziest thing to put me in an ICU and then give me a team of patients, and I could be like, well, I can check the boxes and I can do the things, but I am ill equipped, even with all of my experience, to genuinely fix this person.
Mhm.
And we do that. And then we take med surg nurses or OB nurses. And we did this during COVID. They would send them to the
Yeah,
ER and they're just like losing it because they don't
yeah,
understand. And at some points, the concept of triage.
yeah,
Like this
yeah.
one is still technically breathing on their own. So we're moving on to this one. And you
Mhm.
just get into all of these, not only logistical problems, but how, if you're in labor and delivery and 99% of your experience is happy, how do you then switch to go to an ER where 70% of your patients that come in true arrest die?
Yeah.
There's way more terrible outcomes than there are happy outcomes in the emergency room. And then you can see that bubble break.
Mm-hmm.
We all know the personalities of nurses. We can have 3 or 4 minute conversations, and I can probably peg what unit you work on based on your personality. And we're just the psychological aspect of doing that to nurses is impactful, let alone the logistics and the patient outcomes and all of the other things that happen. You're getting hit from all sides.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the psychological impact is it's so big, but I think it's the least looked at, and it's the least noticed even by the person. You know, they just will be like, just feel like a failure. I mean, you know, I've consoled many med surg nurses who came to the ICU who were crying, you know, and it's not their fault. You know, they're put in that position against their will, literally.
And there's no way that even if they were willing, that they are set up to even be successful.
Yeah.
That's a moral injury.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah,
and we do that as if it's nothing.
Yeah.
As if there is no downside or no impact to that. And even if that med surg nurse, let's say that she survived her 1 12-hour shift, I worked 1 12-hour shift in the ICU, right? Mm-hmm. And the patients that I got when I came in were alive, and when I left, they were alive. And I was like, I can offer you nothing else. Like, that is it. They were alive when I got them, and they were alive when I left them.
Right.
I'm an ER nurse. That's all I know how to do. And we're not even considering, when we do that to a med surg nurse or a labor and delivery nurse, they now go back to their unit with a loss of confidence.
Yeah.
With some sort of negative connotation about their ability to perform. And I think nurses are notoriously perfectionist, or we are constantly striving to move forward. And they're not going to accept that there was no way they could be successful. It is always going to be, I should have known how to, or I should have done, or I should have seen. And so all of that just gets sit right on top of your shoulders. And whether we want to admit it or not, is going to start practice. It's going to affect the practice that you are comfortable with doing.
Yeah.
That's the moral injury element of it, which is like I've said before, like the fundamental element of nursing nurses, the fundamental elemental level of what makes up a nurse is that they care. And when they it's their caring that is actually hurting them, because they're putting themselves, or we are putting ourselves in positions to do things that, like, you're just all of the things that you're describing, put us in situations where we are incapable of actually doing the care. When you don't have the tools to do the job, it hurts your soul. It hurts that part of you that is truly good, which is the caring part.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it damages it. And
it damages
with it typically goes one of two ways. They leave. They're going to exit the profession altogether, because at some point, and I think we have all been there, you get to, it is literally them or me.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, the other thing, like, last week, I mean, I have done a lot of research, after my breakdown. I think I've talked about this before, how, I called the state board of nursing, both of the states I was licensed in, called them, and they had nothing for PTSD for nurses. So I often, this is part of why I'm doing this work. I'll do a lot of research on nursing suicide, because I've had lots of friends that have taken their own lives, and I think, last week I did a search, the NIH, everyone is talking about nursing suicide. I mean, that's where my mind is going, listening to you guys talk. This is why nurses are killing themselves, an element. And it feels like having this conversation, I feel like this conversation will help help heal some of these nurses that are really suffering right now.
Mhm.
And I don't think I've said this before. One of the things that really, really pisses me off is the every month the state boards will put out they send out the newsletter and they've got all the nurses that have been arrested for something
Oh,
Not
and they
paying your taxes.
do it publicly. It's like
Yes.
it is so it makes me so mad. Like I could have been on the back of that newsletter so
yeah.
easily.
Well, it's public shaming.
It's
It's
public
public
shaming.
shaming. It's like how they used to go out and they used to hang the people in the courtyard. That's
Uh-huh.
what it is.
I mean,
And
I'm bringing that up because maybe someone will know a nurse that was on the back of one of those newsletters, and they'll send them this podcast, and they'll be like, "People understand,"
yeah,
like, and
You are publicly shamed and admonished for for your inability to navigate a system that is not set up for you to successfully navigate it.
uh-huh.
So even if you are the best at what you do and the most mentally stable and you have your entire act is together, ducks are in a row. If we put you into this healthcare system, whether we all want to admit it or not, the system itself is going to start sending those ducks in different directions.
yeah,
And you cannot successfully get across the pond navigating that system the way it is designed.
yeah,
So you either leave or you figure out how to survive within a system that is meant for your destruction.
Mm.
And I say meant, and I mean that word. That is not a misstep. It is meant for your destruction.
What? Like, explain that because, like, last week we talked about the pharmaceutical industry and how it became what it is.
Mhm.
And Julie brought up the idea that there was a malicious intent, and I pushed back and I said, how it became what it is it's logical. It makes sense how it became such an efficient tool, and I'm not saying that there isn't terrible, unethical, immoral acts done by pharmaceutical companies. Absolutely. No question. I mean, the opioid crisis in so many ways was fabricated to make money. I mean, they're doing documentaries, they're making movies about it. Like,
Mhm.
that stuff is like,
Mhm.
okay. I feel like choosing to see, choosing to say like that this whole thing is designed to hurt you. I think that so one of the things that I like to think about is how other industries are giving care. So, like the financial advisor that prevents someone from making a financial mistake that saves their life, like that's caregiving. They're giving
Only
care.
if they are a fiduciary and they're required to, and there's nothing in it for them.
True, true.
So even in something as innocuous as the finance industry, the people who are designing the system, so whoever builds this hedge fund company, if they choose to be good, then they're obviously going to be a fiduciary. But that system as a whole is only as good as those people making that decision. And any system that we have, and all healthcare systems are this way across the board, nurses have all of the responsibility, none of the authority. And if hospitals are trying to claim that we are not the cog in the wheel that they are willing to routinely break, the system is designed so that the nurse is the one that routinely breaks. That's what I mean by it is meant to happen that way. If you look at the way the healthcare system is designed, everything, if the room isn't cleaned, that
Yeah,
doesn't
we
fall
carry
on
it. Yeah,
housekeeping.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
me.
yeah.
If the sink is clogged, that's not a plumber. That's me that has to take care of that. If the patient needs transport, that's not a transport service. That's me. If the patient doesn't have a house to discharge to, I'm coordinating that. So everything about this system is designed to fall on one person, and that is the nurse. And one of the things I teach my students is if it exists within the four walls of that institution, it's your job.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that is housekeeping, dietary, plumbing, physical therapy, transport, it doesn't matter. That is your job. It's designed that way. It is meant so that all of that weight and none of the authority falls directly on the nurse. She is the expense on the budget sheet.
Yes.
Expendable.
Yes.
It is designed so that that weight sits right there.
And I don't, the people you can say, the CEO, the nursing director, you can talk about those individuals. And I don't think that those individuals are maliciously doing that. They are also in the system.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole system is making it, no matter, you can have the greatest CEO. And I've worked under a couple, but they only have they're constrained.
Yep.
And they're then working with what you are, which is an expense. You
Correct.
are an expense. And in a business model, you have to manage your expenses. And so to give nurses what they deserve, what they should have, how treat them as humans and part of the, like if we had investment in the company and we were part of all of that, we would be treated differently. We don't have a seat at the table. We
Not
are
even
the
close.
worker bee. Yeah.
Yes.
And,
not
and,
even
and
close.
it's just how it is. It's just how it is. And that is a huge thing that in our lifetime was never going to change. But I think what we can do is bring awareness that this is the system that you're going into as a nurse, and bring awareness to what is moral injury so that it can be identified when it happens. So when you go into a situation as a nurse unprepared and you start feeling the feelings and the flushed face and the tight chest and tingly, and you're going to cry because your mind is like, you are not safe. This is not safe. You don't know. And whether the charge nurse is yelling at you or whether she's like, you're going to be okay. I've got you. It doesn't matter. She might look after your patients and they may be alive when you leave, but the feeling of being unsafe, that someone, you're not doing that to yourself. They're doing it to you.
Correct.
So if a nurse can recognize that she's not safe, and either refuse the assignment, which that is another whole situation, or just do the things for herself, whether she needs to breathe through it, whether she needs something, and even after the shift, to debrief with someone, with herself, with journaling, with a group, with going into her nurses group, talking about it, venting about it, being angry about it, but knowing that it has nothing to do with who she is as a person, the human being, the soul that she is, and the education, that she still is a very good nurse in an environment that supports her to do that. And so maybe that's the little piece that we're able to bring, which is awareness to what you're actually getting into. Like I did with the interview.
Yes.
This is a busy unit. Like, I'm not joking. You might have 8 total patients this shift, 3 discharges and 3 admits, along with your other 2. So that's the truth. And in my opinion, one thing that healthcare does is they're not true. They're not telling the truth. They hide the things that are probably, they don't look good, and people would be like, why are you doing that to them? Why are you making that nurse go there? Why are you doing? So it's just part of the staffing, that's just how we do. And they don't ever really have an answer because I was the one who chimed up in the meetings, and I'm like, we're not putting another thing on the nurse, and we're not putting another thing on the supervisor. We're not doing it. And all the looks at me, and then I'm just sitting there like, yeah. Well, that's why I didn't last long. I couldn't take it.
And I will tell you, the first time I was ever charged in the ER, we had 24 beds. There were 3 nurses. And we're talking about a freestanding facility. So I run my own labs. I transport my own patients. I triage. From triage to dispo. There are 3 nurses in that building.
Oh my
3. 1 doc, 1 x-ray CT, and 1 tech. That is it. And we got 24 beds, and there are typically 40 or 50 deep in that waiting room.
God.
As you know, anybody who knows the system, I got to have somebody at triage. So now I've got 2 nurses, 24 beds, and 1 tech that can get nothing done but run labs.
Yeah.
That's just, she's stuck in that lab. I can't get her help with anything. And the first time I ever took charge, and I said, okay, how many nurses do I have? All right, we have a 4-to-1 ratio. So of these 24 beds, I'm opening 8. Yeah. And the heads that rolled.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they lost it. My manager showed up at 11 o'clock at night because I am sure that the waiting room, like they used to watch, it was Meditech, they used to watch that system. He'd watch it from home. And instead of being our usual 40 or 50 deep, we're 80 something deep at this point. And he wants to know why we're not moving patients. Well, we only have 8 rooms open because I only have 2 nurses available. And math tells me that's all that I can take. And he lost it. Mm-hmm. And just me putting my foot down and saying, if you want 24 beds open, then I need the staff to run 24 beds. Yeah. And man, did he only let me charge when he had no other stuff. Because that's the first thing I did.
Yeah, he's got a hand tied there. He can't fire you.
Yeah.
I'm like, you have been after your name. Come on in.
Yeah.
I'll open 4 more rooms. Come on in.
Yeah. Well, and you know why they get so uncomfortable is because then they have to go to the either hospital owner or the whoever's above them and say, what's the deal here? Or, 79 of the people out there send a shitty survey back about how long they had to wait and the wait times and the throughput times and all that bullshit.
The left without being seen just skyrocket. And they have to explain all that. Yeah. And the answer is never, I didn't have enough staff to run this unit efficiently, effectively, or safely. That's not what they want to say. Yeah. They want to say, well, the nurse wouldn't open all the rooms. Yeah. And they're not going to include why the nurse won't open all the rooms. Yeah. They don't want to put any of that there. Yeah. And so it becomes the only power we have to change this is to educate those who do the job to be effective at dealing with the things the system is going to pile on you. Because there is no other method to change it. Right. This is it.
Yeah. 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 And I know a lot of nurses are talking about it and, I really do. And have been, and there's no change. Nothing ever changed. I worked at the same hospital for 24 years. Nothing ever changes. But I do think that is preparing the nurses and educating the nurses who currently work to be able to navigate that kind of environment. And then take care of their own selves and their own mental health rather than taking it all on as failure and stress that is nobody should have to deal with because you think that you should know, but you don't know. Nobody's prepared for that.
And one of the things I teach my students is like, guys, you cannot compare your performance to my performance. I've been doing this as long as some of you have been alive. Now, if you want to pause and then we revisit this topic in 22 years, then we have a fair comparison. At some point, somebody taught you to use a spoon. So it is my job as your instructor to teach you these things. You are not going to magically or instinctively or intuitively know these things until you have been taught it. And so when you graduate, one of the things I teach them is you find the people who are willing to teach you. You find the moms of the unit. And yes, they are more difficult to deal with. And yes, they are not going to let you slack, not even for a minute. But if you find those people, you will be successful. You cannot go into it thinking that, okay, I passed nursing school, I have nothing left to learn.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you passed nursing school, but you don't know anything.
You don't
Yeah.
know anything yet.
Literally don't.
Nothing. I think we've all had that moment in our careers where we're like, for me, I was 5 years in and I'm in the back of an ambulance treating an MI, and I make it through all the things that I'm supposed to do for the first time before I get to the hospital. And I'm just kind of sitting there going like, okay, I did the oxygen, did the morphine, we got a line, I drew the blood, like I'm like, I did it, and then this overwhelming just fear, like, hold on, wait a minute, this is not the first MI I've taken care of. Does this mean that all the MIs that I treated for the previous 5 years, I didn't do it? And you start to look back and realize that progression of just being in it and kind of learning it and having a deeper understanding versus that surface level knowledge that you come out with. And you're like, how didn't I kill anybody?
Yeah.
Like, how did that not happen?
Yeah.
And you kind of have that epiphany. And so we as educators got to do a better job of getting students to realize you don't know what you don't know. And you have to be willing to learn it. And in the way this system is designed, no one's doing that for you. Yeah. No one's making you do it. They are going to leave you on your own. So you have to seek out these mothers of these units who are going to say, come here, let me teach you. Let me show you. You're doing this in 47 steps when it can be done in 3. Come here. Let me help you. And we just don't do that in school. Yeah. Nor do we do it in orientation. And we just, your person that you orient with could be a different person every single time. Or it could be somebody who graduated 6 months ago. Yeah. And I'm just over here like, oh, I'm not even Catholic. I'm going to give you one of those.
Yeah.
I mean, how is somebody who graduated 6 months ago charge on a unit? Yeah. Orienting new nurses. And just this is where that system has led us, because all of us who finally realize we're out.
So I want to shift gears just a little bit, and I feel like that's a good segue, because I do feel like the system is changing, and and like we talked about before we started recording, you're kind of on the cutting edge of technology and the application of AI. I mean, I've said this before, just us doing this podcast and talking about the trauma of nurses and everything that's placed on us is in some way could be viewed as an advocacy for technology, for the implementation. Because if AI can somehow replace us in that cog, then it is saving a tremendous amount of human suffering on the side of nurses. So, and I mean, it's the time that we're in, and I've said it before. I don't like AI. I don't like. I shouldn't. It's just there's so much. We're moving so fast. We haven't even figured out how to keep data breaches from happening.
Of course.
Like, so we're going to push forward and integrate our entire world with this technology. Like, it doesn't make any sense. We haven't even problem solved what we have. So that, but you're already using AI. Tell us. I don't know how AI. I mean, I know in radiology, I've talked about that, I think, on the podcast, AI can more accurately diagnose diseases than the human. I've talked to a radiologist about that, and she said that she's a long way from losing her job. Like, it's years away from her job being eliminated.
And I think with AI integration into education, we as nurses are never going to be replaced. I think as far as the education side goes, this allows me, I use AI in an adaptive sense. So our NCLEX questions that we use are adaptive now. It's not just a set of questions. If my student can start out and they answer the first 3 correctly, well, then the 4th one will be harder. And if they get the 4th one correct, the 5th one is harder. And so we are stretching and pushing that knowledge base by instead of everybody answers the same 100 questions at the same level, we're pushing you until you get to that point where you can no longer answer the questions successfully. And that's my gap. And if a certain percentage of my students land at the same gap, then I'm going to look at discriminating factors. Is it the top half of my class or the bottom half of my class? Does this mean that my lecture on fluid and lights was lacking in this area? So that's how we're using it currently. And then I use it for part of my virtual simulations. And the reason I use the AI is because they can't treat it like an ACLS checklist that they go through, because it's never going to be the same simulation twice. So even if they check the same interventions or do the same things, it's going to adapt to make them think. You can't memorize your way through what I do. I won't allow it, because I don't care if you can memorize the content. I care if you can think.
So it kind of sounds like to me what you're doing there is countering all of the negative effects that you were talking about, nurses coming out unprepared.
Yes.
I mean, there's still like the
wildly unprepared.
I mean, yeah, you're going to be wildly unprepared. Like no one, like you can't simulate the first time that you do chest compressions and you break the sternum in half, this way, and like every rib, like how it feels on your wrist when you compress, and the trauma of that just has to be lived. And nobody tells you that you're going to experience that. Like you can't simulate it.
No, you can't simulate it. Although I do have mannequins that have all of these physiological features, and I can in fact disconnect ribs.
Oh wow!
You can do. I mean,
so you can feel that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does it feel like it does on a human? No.
No, but at least there's the awareness. I mean, it was so traumatic. It was so traumatic the first time that I pounded on a 103-year-old woman's chest.
The first time I did end of life care and I rolled the person and air was pushed out of the lungs.
Yeah.
You want to talk about a heart attack that I still remember to this day. And so we can get not an exact simulation, but with some of that high fidelity stuff that's out there, I can at least make them situationally aware so that their first reaction when this happens to them in the actual clinical practice is not panic.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we have to try and avoid. And that's the reason why we have to integrate and sequence simulation to expose them to everything that I possibly can before the real world does it. If you don't teach your toddler boundaries, the real world will. If we don't teach our nursing students these things, the real world will.
Absolutely.
And when I do it in a simulated environment, no one dies. Your mistakes don't kill anybody. Your mistakes don't injure somebody. Your mistakes don't injure you beyond your ability to recover from it because you're the one that made said decision. So I think AI has a significant place, not only in education, but in the nursing world. And I think we could use AI to route some of that housekeeping, to route some of that staffing, to route and adjust some of those things on the fly that don't necessarily take the job of the nurse, but perhaps improve all of those ancillary processes that the nurse is responsible for so that we can get the nurse back to just being the nurse. I would venture to ask every single nurse that's ever left the profession, if I put you back into an environment where you had to do nothing but be the nurse, would you go back? I would.
Yeah.
I would go back in a heartbeat if all I had to do was be the nurse.
Yeah. And an appropriate staffing level.
Right. Yeah. But all the things that come with all the things.
Right. No, I agree.
Be the nurse.
Yeah.
I think we could get those 150 to 300,000 nurses that are just bailing out as fast as they possibly could within 5 years. We could keep them. And so AI, yes, it's a scary thing. And yes, we can't secure it. And yes, it's brand new. But if we get on the cutting edge of it, then we can dictate how it's implemented instead of allowing what we've always done is somebody else who operates in a C-suite or owns a healthcare company or who doesn't do the job. If we don't dictate it, they will.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming, whether we like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So we might as well control that implementation and make it take care of the things that don't replace us. Because we all know that AI is not going to be able to look at the 90-year-old lady who comes into the emergency room at 9 a.m. and she looks at you and she says, well, honey, I just don't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And she is that classic heart attack gray. She didn't say adjust her, but I don't need her to. I see you.
No, yeah, I see you.
You right now.
Yeah.
So we're never going to be able to replace that. But if we can take some of that ancillary weight off and get back to just being nurses, couple that with maybe improving a couple other things and teaching people how to navigate, we could use AI positively.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be scared of it.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
I know you don't like it. But it's coming one way or another.
Yeah,
so
I know.
I use it to benefit my students, and how can I dictate what that process is?
Mm-hmm.
And not that I'm the end-all be-all authority, and by I mean how can educators dictate how that's implemented so that it does benefit our students and it's not another checkbox. It's not something that we just have to complete because we're in nursing school. We can make it truly beneficial.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's episode.
Remember, the conversation doesn't end here.
Keep the dialogue going by connecting with us on social media posted in the links below or by visiting our website.
Together, let's continue to redefine nursing and shape a brighter future for those we care for. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep nurturing those connections.
And don't forget to be kind to yourself.